Yeah, sorry. Just messing with the settings real quick. Okay, looks like everything's up and running. I think. Showing stream. Got the window here. Always takes me a few seconds to like get the live stream going because I don't know exactly. So, how's everybody doing? I hope everyone's staying safe during all the quarantine and stuff. Please let me know how the audio sounds if anybody wants to message in the box. I think it sounds okay. I'm listening back to it now, but I just want to know from y'all's end how it sounds. All right. Anybody there in the chat? Should be live. Okay, there we go. Just wanted to make sure it was actually streaming out. I didn't hear anything. But yeah, as I said, I hope everyone's doing well. Today's stream, like most of them, are just going to be pretty casual Q&A type streams. Just hanging out, maybe about 2 hours. Happy to answer any questions you have about me, about typology, about my views on typology, psychology overall, as I am a student of psychology with a bachelor's, my plans for the future, whatever you're interested in talking about, whatever you'd like to ask about, feel free to ask those questions. Now, I would like to open up by saying thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon, because they are the ones who really help me get by, especially during these harder times where the YouTube algorithm hasn't been as nice to me as it used to be. And I have too many patrons in the lowest tier to put them all on the screen right here, but I do want to thank those patrons at the $1 tier as well. Thank you all so much for your support for this channel. So let's go ahead and see if there's any questions over here, and it looks like there are. According to Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence, can a person have more than one dominant intelligence? Well, Gardner's theory is separate from general intelligence theory. It doesn't really have much quantitative backing to it, so it really depends on like how you want to define that. Because if you were to try and measure Howard Gardner's 8 or 9 intelligences, depending on which model you're viewing, you could easily quantify them in some aspect, but how they relate to the overall G-factor version of intelligence, or what we consider to be core intelligence in quantitative psychology, would be different because they're two entirely separate things. G-factor intelligence is usually broken down into 2 or 3 major categories: verbal educational, quantitative educational, and spatial, if I've got them off the top of my head. But yes, I think people can have varying degrees of strength. I don't know if one could be exceptionally dominant and then also have one that's equally dominant. You would probably find that there'd likely be some shifting of balance there, but I'm not entirely sure. It's a good question. Do I know much about Enneagram? I know the very, very basics of Enneagram. I score as a 5-wing 4. I'm not entirely sure if I would agree with that being my my type in Enneagram, but I've always scored as a 5-wing 4 on various tests. Also, I got a little energy drink here, so it'll help keep me going. Also, I got a brand new computer because my last one busted down, as some of you may know. Look, my new one, it's got LEDs, flashing lights, and all that. Yay. Okay, back to the questions. Let's see, stream. Okay, everything's still looking good, just making sure. What is the subject? Elmedi, today's subject is just casual typology, psychology, anything you want to ask or talk about related to MBTI or personality typology overall. My greatest strengths in personality typology are in Jungian or classical and analytical types of psychology, but of course Briggs as well. I am quite well versed in, and I'm somewhat educated on newer models such as socionics. But I know the kind of the bare minimum on those newer models as they stray away from Jung's original interpretation. And therefore, that's what I'm trying to stick to in my presentation of personality typology, because I think that Jung's view on typology, as of right now, is the most accurate to what I've seen. And it's the one that I'm willing to teach and explore the most. Differences between ENTPs and ENFPs? Well, I mean, there's not going to be too much difference in their dominant characteristics because these both have dominant extroverted intuition. They're both going to be open. They tend to be very energetic. enthusiastic people, especially about things that they're interested in, or especially about things that they're interested in. Excuse me, I can't talk. But you find that ENTPs tend to be more so on the entrepreneurial or maybe even educational side, whereas ENFPs tend to be more so adventurous and explorative with life. The ENFPs usually are just trying to have a good time in some way, shape, or form, or the ENTPs tend to have these more so like little goals that they want to achieve or things that they maybe like to create or explore. Is the MBTI method used in actual clinical psychology? I wouldn't say it's used in clinical psychology, but you're very likely would find it at a master's level of therapy and counseling, because the MBTI step 3, which is beyond the step 2, which most people don't even know about this MBTI step 2, which is it's great, by the way. But the step 3 was designed to be used in a more counseling type setting at the master's level, and you have to have a master's degree in psychology or an equivalent degree to even get the step 3 certification. I don't have it because all I have is a bachelor's, but I'd like to in the future. You're most likely going to find MBTI counseling or therapy in things like marriage counseling or communication therapy. Most people who are practitioners like myself offer things such as life, personality, or business coaching. And that, I think, tends to be the best way to employ MBTI as a tool for helping somebody, is in some form of life coaching. I don't think it's a great clinical tool, but I think it's an exceptional life tool. Excuse me. How do I know if I'm an intuitive or sensor? I mean, you just have to kind of look at the dichotomy, really. I mean, intuitives are going to be more on the abstract side, sensors more on the realistic, practical side. That's more one of the basic divisions. And then you really have to know about where you lie within the cognitive function stack as well, because an introverted intuitive and an extroverted intuitive are going to be quite different. So you really, the best thing you can do is just, for one, see if you relate to one or more of the dichotomies, and then look at the functions related to those two things. So introverted and extroverted intuition and sensing. Read the definitions of them. I will say this in every stream, excuse me while I get it out, but Gifts Differing is the best book for learning MBTI at a beginner's level. If you're somebody who wants to explore MBTI as it was written by Briggs herself, because this is her book on MBTI and the functions and the types, if you want to get a first-hand source for MBTI, Gifts Differing's the book. Now, if you want to get a deeper understanding of how functions and type actually work, Psychological Types is going to be your next bet, your next best bet, because it's really the deeper understanding of psychological type. But then you'll find that even some of Jung's work about type extends beyond psychological types. For example, in Psychology and Alchemy, there's talk of the functions again. So a lot of Jung's work extends through a lot of his books. Is there a reason why INFJ like me would relate more to the EP or the P stereotypes like disorganization? Well, if you're an INFJ, you're a lead intuitive type, you're actually a perceiving dominant type. You have secondary extroverted judging. If you're struggling with disorganization, it probably means your extroverted judging secondary function isn't at a healthy state of development yet and hasn't been fully employed. I wasn't organized until I was about 20, 21 years old. I was a straight D student who almost failed out of high school. And then I grew up a little bit. That extroverted thinking started to develop a little bit more, and I graduated with a straight A average from college. It's very common for the INJs specifically to suffer from disorganization earlier in their life because they don't have extroverted judging to back up their perceptions, and they tend to live in their little fantasy worlds or their perceptions without actually attempting to do what needs to be done to make those things a reality. How can INTJs be nicer apart from giving more compliments and being less critical when speaking to people? INTJs, I think, in my opinion, you're very rarely going to find an INTJ who's mean on purpose. I mean, of course, there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be people who are just kind of jerks. But as a perceiving dominant type, specifically an introverted perceiving dominant type, IJs are usually the most laid-back people. They tend to be very open and relaxed when it comes to communicating information. And INTJ is going to be accidentally critical, I think. They usually don't mean or have ill intentions when they're saying things, but they're quick to point out flaws when they arise. So it really just kind of, you have to bring some conscious awareness to like, who are you communicating with and what are they going to perceive as maybe offensive or critical or mean. You have to work within the boundaries of the group that you're with. How do I confirm whether or not I'm an INTJ or an ISFP? The way I see it, and thanks to other people, I am an IDOM, but I feel like my FI is too strong for an INTJ. Well, if you're an INTJ, FI is also going to be a function that's very dear to you, especially as a tertiary function, because it's on the same attitude / energy axis as your dominant function. And sometimes it might appear as if it's overpowering to that. I think it's quite common for INTJs to think that maybe they're ISFPs or FI types because their FI is quite valuable to them. The difference, though, between an ISFP and an INTJ is that an INTJ is not going to wear their FI on their sleeve easily, not until their later years in life. They tend to be very private about their interests, their values, and their presentation, but these are things that they hold strongly to them. Whereas an ISFP, on the other hand, is going to be much more open and relaxed about sharing the things that they're interested in, talking about their private life and feelings, and they're going to be just more open with their feelings in general. INTJs and ISTJs are the most private types in terms of feeling, even more so than ETJs who have repressed introverted feeling, because repressed introverted feeling is more of the personality and therefore shows up in negative situations. Where if you're looking at tertiary cognitive functions, they tend to not show up nearly as much as repressed functions and tend to be this backseat kind of function. They don't take up a huge role in the conscious. But their influence is strong and it's valued, and it takes conscious awareness, I think, is the difference. Because if you're an FI dominant type, your FI is natural to you. It's not something that you have to actively think about. Just like if you're an NI dominant type, NI is natural to you. If you're an NI dominant type and constantly mulling over your FI, there's a good chance that it takes conscious awareness to be in that state of introverted feeling, and it's something that's probably not your dominant function. Because your dominant function is essentially natural to you. It's the autopilot of your conscious. I believe that AstroChart is also powerful. They're using machine learning to make AstroChart, MBTI, Enneagram, DISC, and Big Five systems with advanced view in person. Not that I know of, Elmedi. I'm sorry. I'm not even entirely sure what you mean by AstroChart, unless you're talking about astrology. Yes. Also, if anybody from the Discord server is here, feel free to say hi and just shout out to anybody who's on the Discord server. I would like to recommend, if you enjoy this type of live stream and these types of discussions, my Discord server is typology based. It's open to anyone of any typology system. It's an open space for communication about psychology and personality. I recommend it you to join if you're interested in joining a community that's active and interested in discussing typology. It's very relaxed, laid back. We have a lot of good chats there. The link to that is in the description below. And I'm sorry if I'm talking fast. When I'm on live stream, I get into, like, I don't know if you want to call it like TE mode, where I have to kind of take control, be aware of everything. Let's see. What types are likely to get INTJ on the MBTI exam? Well, INTJs. I think INTPs as well. Maybe you might find an INTJ who would score like INFP or something, but I don't really think so, because introverted feeling is tertiary. It's probably not going to be something that they think too, like, that is going to be very much a presentation of themselves. I don't think many actual INTJs think of themselves as feelers, but they recognize the need for feeling. I think an INFJ could easily mistype as an INTJ or an INTP. Those two types are probably the types that are going to mistype most often. So hold on, let me switch over, because yesterday I made a community post and I want to answer some of the questions there that people left. So, do you think that certain personality types tend to have conditions such as autism, dyslexia? So this is a hard question. I did a video last year on MBTI types and personality disorders, which is kind of a different topic, because autism and dyslexia tend to be more, I don't want to say more genetic, but they don't work in exactly the same way as something like a personality disorder. They're more like these kind of long-lasting conditions that have some underlying... It's hard to say because these conditions are different, but the way that they're differentiated is also hard to classify. I don't think so. I don't think autism or dyslexia specifically is attributed to one or more personality types, but I just don't think so. I think unlike personality disorders, for example, you might find that people with certain personality disorders are going to test as or cluster in some sort of personality type. So, for example, ENFPs tend to be borderline personality disorder, bipolar, because the high energy emotion switching, that type of thing, that their natural behaviors tend to go along with those categorizations of personality disorder. But I don't think the same thing applies with things like autism and dyslexia. can I give a little insight into psychology and conspiracy theories? So people who tend to be conspiracy theorists are usually either extroverted intuitives or low introverted intuitives, like ESXPs. Types that are either highly exploratory about intuition and then tend to hold those intuitive close to themselves, maybe if they lock it into their introverted judging function. Those types can be very much into conspiracy theories, but also types who aren't very good at seeing the underlying meaning behind things, which is going to be types with lower introverted intuition, like ESXPs. Can I explain the difference between TI and TE in detail? So TI and TE are... I talk a lot about this in my INTP versus INTJ differences video. The first one I did on the channel, which was my first ever video, and also the remake. And generally, TI creates internal systems of logic and uses logic as a reasoning process for coming to conclusions about things. So types with TI tend to need things to make logical, consistent sense for it to be applicable in terms of thinking. Whereas extroverted thinking types tend to not care as much about this if the thought or thing that they're thinking about can impact the world in the way that they need it to. They have a much more like, will it work type of approach to information. How can I employ this information? It doesn't matter if it's completely 100% correct, if it's usable. And this is something that you're going to see a struggle with between TE and TI types in typology, for example, because a lot of TI types, especially NTPs here on the YouTube space, are people who are developing their own systems because they disagree with something within the original framework of Jung's view. Whereas for me, as a TE type, I'm much more likely and interested in just understanding Jung's work and applying it, because I think that his theoretical concept was so good that I don't think I personally need to redefine it. So that's what I attempt to do here on this channel, and that's me as more so a TE type as well. I have no interest right now at this point in my life in creating another form of typology or redefining what Jung had to say. I more so want to gain deeper insight into his writings. And I think that's one decent way we could look at TE versus TI. Let me switch back to the chat for a little bit, and then I'll come back to those questions there too. I'm an INTJ. I find FE-DOMs very attractive. It appears to me that ENFJs and ESFJs are not likely to be able to tolerate the abrasiveness and uniqueness of INTJs. Well, I'm married to an ENFJ. And abrasiveness can certainly be an issue, but as I kind of mentioned earlier when someone asked about the niceness of INTJs usually don't intend to be mean. It's not like the TI dominant types who have that repressed feeling, or TE dominant types who also have repressed feeling. These types are very overtly critical. If they think something's dumb, they're just going to tell you that it's dumb, and they're not going to care too much about how it makes you feel, specifically if they haven't developed this feeling side of their function. And younger thinking dominant types really tend to struggle with this. But INTJs, again, have that more accidental type of hurting people's feelings when they're talking. ENTPs as well, with tertiary extroverted feeling, are going to be types who kind of come off as abrasive, but they don't have this intention to be abrasive. Now, FE-DOMs, especially ENFJs, ESFJs, theoretically make pretty good partners with INTJs. They don't tend to be able to meet on all communication levels. You'll often find that INTJs get along very well in terms of natural communication with types like ENFPs, or just generally intuitive dominant types, because INTJs as intuitive dominant types enjoy discussing intuitive processes. So I think that extroverted intuitive dominant types are very easily able to get the intuition out of an INTJ, bring out the inner intuition, and let them talk about that, which tends to be the things that INTJs are really excited to talk about, is ideas. But I think ENFJs can do this as well. There's just going to have to be some communication. They're going to have to come together. Now, ESFJ is a much harder type for this. If an ESFJ has developed extroverted intuition as their tertiary function, like they start to value this function enough and they can employ it in some sense, then maybe the INTJ is going to be able to latch on to that. But I think that's a much harder sell than an INTJ and an ENFJ. Why are ENFPs and ESFJs so similar? I don't think they're that similar. Not in my experience, at least. There is similarity in the functions, SINE, but then there's the FI-TE difference. Eric says, I just joined your Discord. Well, welcome to the Discord then. After the live stream, I'll be around to say hi there as well. So yeah, again, if you're in my Discord, you will be able to talk to me because I'm there every day. Like I have my phone on me always. I'm always willing to talk to people, at least in chat. I usually hop in voice chat a couple times a week to say hi. It's very casual, laid back. Sometimes we talk about MBTI. Sometimes we just have a good time. I call it a common interest server. It's not something that's entirely academic. It's not there just to talk about MBTI. It's about bringing people who are interested in typology together, so there's an open place for discussion about these things. What were your struggles as a teenage INTJ? Productiveness and an interest in the things that I wanted to get done. So I think it was the TEFI axis was really a struggle point. I didn't do like anything as a teenager. I wasted my life away. I stayed home, played video games all the time. I put forth full effort onto things that I was really interested in, but I was not interested in anything productive in my life. And it wasn't until I found my passion in psychology, what I was kind of interested in pursuing, that I really found that the TEFI started to work together a little bit more, and I was able to pursue that long-term vision of becoming a clinical psychologist. I already have the next like 10 or so years of my life figured out what I want to do. But I definitely also kind of struggled with being too closed off as a teenager. I was very, very private. I was a little bit abrasive emotionally. I didn't like people delving into my private life. I've had to force myself to overcome that. I've done a lot in the past few years to make myself more approachable, to understand that people are valuable and not... I kind of used to be like the average edgy NT teenager. I used to just kind of think people were dumb or whatever. And I'll admit that because I feel like I've grown out of that stage in my life. But now I don't feel that way. Now I think that I can see the value in each individual when that value is there. The best and most accurate MBTI test, the actual MBTI step 1 or step 2, is going to be the best MBTI test you can take. Most people don't realize that the MBTI is a formally administered assessment that has over 40 or 50 years of quantitative backing behind it. It actually works. It's pretty good. But the way that the MBTI was created and designed is it's meant to be taken with a practitioner. Because results are so hard to measure and the assessment itself doesn't measure functions, it measures traits which are associated with functions, you're supposed to take the assessment and then afterwards have a session with a practitioner, and that practitioner will go over the results with you and talk about the differences between what you perceive in yourself and the scores you received on the assessment. That's how the MBTI was actually meant to be administered, and that's why there are MBTI certification programs. So you can teach someone how to administer and interpret the MBTI and then work with people and help them understand the results. Do I think that trauma can suppress dominant functions? Maybe, yes. Trauma is a hard thing because, for one, trauma is subjective, in that something that's entirely traumatic to someone could be nothing to someone else. And I think type has a huge part in that. Because, for example, you might find that ENTJs or ESTJs are much easier, are going to have a much easier time avoiding trauma unless it's something truly traumatic. But like feeling dominant types tend to be very prone to easily accepting something abrasive to them as emotionally traumatic. Now, thinking dominant types can be very, very abrasive and very, very likely to, how do I want to say this, respond negatively in many situations to things that are unpleasant to them, but I don't think they have the same capacity for trauma that you tend to find in feeling dominant types, because feelings are more raw in those types. Let me take a sip of my drink. I'm getting thirsty. What do you think about C.S. Joseph typing Jung as an INTP? Well, I think actually Jung was probably an INTP. A lot of people want to type Jung as an INFJ, and I really don't think he is. Like, one of the main reasons I don't think Jung is an INFJ or an introverted intuitive dominant is because he talked about them as if they were really weird. If you go on Google and you type in Jung interview introverted intuition, there's an interview where he's talking to someone else, or he's being interviewed, and he talks about a patient he had who was an introverted intuitive, and he describes her as a schizophrenic almost. Like, he's like, I don't understand exactly what's going on in her mind, these subjective processes, because she says something along the lines of, she came in for her first session and she said, "Doctor, I have a snake in my stomach." And Jung says to her, "What do you mean you have a snake in your stomach? Are you having delusions?" And no, she goes, "No, I don't mean I literally have a snake in my stomach. I mean I feel as if a snake is in my stomach, writhing, I don't know, going through my system." And Jung didn't know how to take this. He was very put off by the subjective nature of introverted intuition, and that's why I don't think he was one. And if you look at his writing style, it's okay. Like Psychological Types and all of his books in general are like the most TI heavy books I've ever read in my life. I can't get through them as a TE type. They're just, I have to get to the places where the concepts are boiled down. Jung was not somebody who boiled down concepts at all. He talked about them in great detail, and he was very explorative about them. So I would argue that Jung's most likely an INTP, or even possibly an ISTP who is exceptionally intelligent with a great deal of developed intuition. But I think INTP is far more likely. But Jung was also one of the greatest minds of his time. You can just see that in his work. His writing is all nearly unparalleled in the terms of psychology. So he stands above a lot of other people in terms of just his communication style. Hello, Elizabeth Henry, one of the people in the Discord. Thanks for stopping into the chat. Do intuitive types love watching sports and reality shows? They can. I don't see why not. I feel like it's going to be less interesting to an intuitive dominant type, specifically an introverted intuitive, but I don't see why not. It's just going to be something that's less on the average side of being liked. There's probably going to be a reason that they like it just beyond the actual enjoyment of the sport itself. What is the most effective way to observe the functions in yourself in cases where they're all well developed or quite underdeveloped? Says Fesses. So cases like these are hard. For example, like the prime time in someone's life to get their personality type is between like the ages of 20 and like 40. Because if they're younger than 20, their auxiliary function is probably not very well developed. And if they're over 40, their tertiary function is probably decently developed. So it becomes harder to type these individuals. Most people tend to even out. And this is what Jung wrote about in his book. The idea of the functions kind of coming out and developing, specifically the auxiliary and the repressed function being 2 points that need a lot more development than much of the other functions. It really just comes down to self-analysis, but not everyone's going to be good at introspection. For example, ESFJs are not probably going to be types who are great at introspection. You know, they're just not naturally interested in looking inside of themselves, and even if they do want to look inwards, it's not going to be in an intuitive way that's in the same way as introverted intuition, where it wants to find meaning associated with something. So one of the last things they're probably likely going to do is going to want to look inwards to discover themselves in that way. So that's when you find that ESFJs, for example, often greatly benefit from things like counseling or therapy, where they have somebody to help them explore their inner depths. I think certain types, though, certainly are going to have a much easier type just looking inwards and saying, well, this is who I think I am, and these are the concepts that I'm trying to relate to. Do any of these fit with me? How does INTP-INTJ relationship go? Platonic and romantic? So maybe it's just me, but INTPs are one of the types that I don't think, like I personally would be able to be in a relationship with. I find TI to be very abrasive, and maybe it's because I'm an intuitive dominant with secondary extroverted thinking, but INTPs are one of the types that are harder for me to get along with because they always, not always, I hate to use stereotypes, but a lot of the INTPs that I know tend to like to argue for the sake of arguing, and I more so like to discuss for the sake of discussion. Like I want to explore concepts. I'm not trying to figure out who's right. And usually with TI dominant types, there's this sense of wanting to be right because they seek truth, they seek knowledge. They're knowledge seekers, and that's good. You know, if they're in a field where that's important, they're in the sciences, that's great. But I'm more exploratory, so I feel like that relationship would actually be a lot harder than people think it might be. What do I think about INFJs in leadership positions? I mean, I think INFJs certainly can be in leadership positions. NFJs overall are known to be the people who advance society as on a more humanistic level, like Gandhi. A lot of people attribute Gandhi as being an INFJ, and this can go both ways, because even some people theoretically say that Hitler may have been an INFJ. I don't know what type Hitler was. I'm just saying that's what people say. So that can go both ways. You know, an extroverted feeling specifically is not going to be a function that's always associated with good. It's going to be associated with the values of the people that are important to them. What are the possible ways whether I can know I'm a TI Dom or an NI Dom? I'm pretty sure I'm INT. Well, TI is going to be much more harsh and abrasive on average, and I just talked about this a couple of minutes ago. TI has a greater desire to seek the truth and fully understand, whereas NI tends to be far more explorative because it's a perception function. It's interested in diving deep into the theory without latching itself onto the logic of that theory. It's far more interested in the concept as a concept. Sparkling Heart says, hello, Asura. Well, hello, Sparkling Heart. Thanks for doing this right now. I need the distraction at work. Hey, that's good. I lied to Silva. I feel like Rick knows that name. And again, I want to give a shout out to the people on my Patreon who are on the lower tiers, because as you can see, I'm already having a hard time filling up the text space down there. I think next time I'll try and shorten the text on this one and put the other patrons in there. I just wasn't ready for it. I got a whole new computer like 2 weeks ago, and I had to reinstall all my software. I had to redo the streaming stuff. What are views on INTJ 5.4? Well, that's what I score as a 5.4 on Enneagram. I can't really say that I have any subjective views on what it means to be an INTJ 5.4. So people talk about Enneagram a lot, and I actually think Enneagram it's okay, but I much prefer Jung's 12 extended archetypes. Because Jung's 12 extended archetypes are just like Enneagram. They talk about core values, core fears, desires in life, all of these things, but they're ascribed more to imagery and meaning, and I think that as an archetypal thing, they come off better than the Enneagram. Although the Enneagram has this thing where like the types are kind of inherently linked to each other in some way, and I don't know exactly how that works, but I'm much more a fan of Jung's 12 archetypes when it comes to the idea of inner values and desires. And I would recommend anybody to look at Jung's 12 extended archetypes. Do I tend to get along with INFJs? What challenges do you believe INTJs and INFJs can face in a platonic relationship? Yes. I get along with NFJs in general fairly well. A lot of my friends in life, well, this is really kind of interesting because a lot of my acquaintances in life are NFJs. My wife, of course, is an ENFJ, but a lot of my acquaintances are NFJs, either ENFJ or INFJ. A lot of my really close friends are NFPs. And again, I think it goes back to the extroverted intuition thing where it's kind of easy to get into that intuitive kind of process and make things a little bit more relaxed and easygoing. But I think INTJ and INFJ could get along exceptionally well as long as they were able to come to some sort of middle ground on the FITETI struggles. It really depends on maturity and development. But that's what you're going to find, and that's what you'll likely say with any type that has opposing functions in some way, shape, or form. Is that it really depends on the maturity and development of the individual cultural context, things of that nature. But certain types are certainly far more likely to get along with other types. For example, an INTJ and INFJ are far more likely to get along than an INTJ and an ESFJ. Is Sherlock Holmes INTJ or INTP? Well, it depends on the Sherlock. If you're talking about BBC's Sherlock, I think it's just called Sherlock. I don't know if he's an INTP or an INTJ. He's like a super computer type person. I think he'd probably be an INTJ. If I had to guess, just because he struggles with extroverted sensing a lot in the show, substance abuse, things of that nature. He's quite intuitive. He's perceptive. He's not expressive with his emotions except in exceptionally rare occasions, which I think tends to be more so associated with tertiary FI than repressed FE. But then again, at the same time, he also is has those explosive moments throughout the show. I don't know. I would probably lean more towards INTJ, but as a fictional character, he's written a certain way, and it's harder to type those types of people. You could just as easily say INTP, and I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. How do you know if a person is extroverted or introverted lead? Well, it tends to be how interactive they are with their outer world, like 80% of the time. I think the pandemic we're going through right now is a great way to tell whether or not somebody is extroverted or introverted, because if they're struggling with the pandemic and being social, things of that nature, they're more likely going to be an extrovert. For example, my ENFJ wife is having a hard time right now because she can't go out, hang out with her friends, things of that nature, where I have literally been home for 4 months, like whatever. Like it doesn't matter to me. I'm happy to stay home all the time. But then again, you have to remember introversion, extroversion isn't entirely social, and there are differences there. outer world interaction is more so important. So it's just as stressful to say like an ENTJ who can't go out and get the things he wants to get done. That's also going to be problematic for, say, for example, an extroverted type, or the ESFP who can't go out and do the things that they enjoy in life. Do you spell extroverted with an A or an O? I spell it with an O. I think it's supposed to be an A. I believe it was originally intra and extra version. But the language has evolved and adapted with time, and spell check will often get mad at me if I use an A, so I just use an O. Well, I introduced my ENFJ wife one day. I might at one point, a long time ago, she was on a video on the channel, back when we were still dating. So my wife isn't actually interested in typology very much. So it's like she doesn't even know really the cognitive functions. So that's why she's not associated much with my kind of YouTube channel. But maybe one day. She is a member on my Discord. She really just doesn't stop by very often. Function-wise, what would motivate each introverted type out of an unhealthy introverted loop? That's hard. Because well, looping isn't technically a term in typology, but I think enough people understand what it means on a core level to know what it essentially is, where you're going into a form of you're doubling down on the subjective factor, or if you're an extrovert, doubling down on the objective factor. A lot of the times, what really needs to be done is to like stop and think about it, or go engage in some sort of process that is forcing yourself to be in the other realm of function attitude. So for example, if I find myself thinking about my FI a lot, like I just had a negative situation in my life and I'm trying to mull it over, one of the best things I can do is go out and take a walk or something and force myself to engage in a little bit of extroverted sensing, even if it's not going to be super intense. Just go out and force myself to use that extroverted attitude a little bit. Sorry, I'm going to have some water. I'm losing my voice already. It's only been 30 minutes. Let me switch back over to the comment questions from the post yesterday. I just want to answer a few more of those. Can I give an opinion on what subjects and types are likely, on what subjects the types are likely to excel at? I believe I'm an INTJ and I was never good at math, but excelled in English. Do you think the dominant trait of introverted intuition has effects on right-brained or left-brained activities? Well, right-brained, left-brained is something that's a little bit hard to relate to types specifically. I know people like Nardi have talked about the idea of its importance, but I don't entirely know specifically like if you're left-handed versus right-handed, because then there's going to be a swip in the hand, or the brainedness. It's not even a word, but it is now how you work. So I think INTJs are far more likely to excel at verbal or linguistic types of skills compared to mathematical because they're an intuitive type. I think the thinking dominant types, TE or TI, are going to be much better at things like mathematics on average because they have that capacity for thinking, for wanting to solve problems in that manner. That said, I think that INTJs, for example, can excel when using things that are more like applied mathematics, like statistics. Tends to be something that even as an INTJ who hates math, I hate math, I like statistics because it has immediate application and I can use it to find out inferences about things. What are my favorite memes on some of the types? I don't know. Maybe I'll share some sometime. What do you think of the perception of sensors in typology? Do you think there might be a negative one? Well, yeah, especially in the typology community. Sensors have this really bad track record, which is one of the reasons I've been trying so hard to make videos on the sensing types on my channels recently. Like you might have seen, I did one on the ISTP and the ISFP, because I think it would be good for this community moving forward to stop treating sensors like they're some sort of outcast, when in reality they're the dominant half of the population. It's 70-30 sensing intuitives. And the reason I think a lot of sensing types aren't in the community is because, one, of course, sensing types are a little less likely to be interested in typology and things of that nature, but we also kind of are already slamming the door in their face. I have a member on my Discord at ESFP, putting it all out there. Shout out to you if you're watching or if you're around. ESFP, great girl, really interested in typology, and it's one of those things where you're like, oh, you don't meet an ESFP who's interested in typology very often, but these types of people can be just as interested in typology if you let them into your play group, if you let them come and discuss with you and you're not putting them down all the time. So I think it's really important moving forward to, as a community, to really stop the censor shaming and like really realize the value that these types have. Like people, as I talked about in my ISFP video, I think Michael Jackson was an ISFP. You know, we look at people like Marilyn Monroe. Some of the most influential people in all of history were sensing types, and this is something that people in the MBTI and typology community tend to forget. Where was I? I think there's only one more question. What types are best at lying? Asked by Luna Gamer. Types that are best at lying, I feel like it tends to be just... Well, it depends on how you're lying, because I think there's types that can be good at lying, but I also think there's functions that directly counteract other functions' versions of lying, if that makes sense. So, for example, I think extroverted intuitives like ENTPs and ENFPs can be very good at lying, but I think that introverted intuitive, dominant, or secondary types are going to be less susceptible to this because they are trying to find meaning in other people's words, actions. So they're not going to take words and things as at such a face value as you might find with the sensing types who more prefer to take in information at that face value. Now, this isn't to say that sensing types are just going to believe everything that's said to them, but they're not always searching for that meaning in what somebody says, and that can lead to a harder time in identifying what is being said or what is being intended by someone's words or actions. And that's why I think that E and E dominant types tend to be very good at influencing people in that way. But also FE types, ENFJs, can be exceptionally good at influencing, and that's why you look at people like Martin Luther King Jr. and again Gandhi, people who are touted as being NFJs. And it's not that they're lying or anything, but human influence is one of the very strong factors of the NFJ types. So that's all the questions from the comments. Let's see where we got here. I'm trying to get to every question I can. By the way, I just want to say, if anyone would like to, super chats are open. If you'd like to support me with a one-time donation on this channel, I would, I'd greatly appreciate it. I'm not, times are hard for everybody right now. So I completely understand if nobody can. But if you would like to support me, or if you want to support me on Patreon, I also really appreciate that. I'm hopefully getting into a Master's of Psychology program this fall. I've got an application in, and so far things are looking promising. I don't have an acceptance letter yet, but if that happens, I'll be moving soon, and my prices for living is going to go up. So I greatly appreciate anyone who's supported me in these times as a content creator here on YouTube. Where did I lose my place? Oh my goodness, quite a few questions. How important is legacy for me as an INTJ? Not really. So my father is an ESFJ, and like his idea of legacy was quite important because he had 2 daughters before he had me. And to him, it was really important to have a son because he wanted to continue the family legacy. And I think that might be more of like an SI thing. So he was really excited when, as the 3rd child, I was the son. And because he's grew up in a more traditional sense. My father's Puerto Rican, so he had more of the values and customs of those cultures. I don't really care about it too much. I'm more interested in my future than I am in leaving anything behind. I am interested in maybe leaving a mark on the world in some way. That would be interesting to me, like to say I made some sort of significant contribution to the field of psychology. That would be really cool for me, but it's not something that I'm completely entirely dedicated to doing right now. I'm more focused on my goals. Favorite movie genre? So I really like, I kind of have a few favorite movie genres. I'm a sucker for martial arts movies, like actual foreign, really well-made martial arts movies, like the Ip Man series. And maybe that's just a repressed extrovert sensing thing, desiring something that I'd probably never be very good at. But I really love martial arts movies. I like movies that have kind of like a meta aspect to them, where there's a mystery that can be solved throughout the movie or something that has to be discovered. I tend to be quite open. Horror sometimes is my thing. I'm not really usually interested in much in like the family-friendly type movies. Or I don't really like pure action movies either, like Fast and Furious. Those aren't my things either. Can coffee serve as personality in a cup? Meaning, can caffeine over years of use make an introvert into extrovert? I don't think so. I mean, caffeine is legally a drug, though, so could have some altering things that we don't know about. Actually, coffee's been around for so long, I doubt it. I don't think so. I don't think it could. I think it would more likely just focus the direction of the energy that's already dominant. People describe me as laid back and go with the flow, soft-spoken, a little mysterious, and eccentric. Based off these few descriptive words, can you narrow down the type? Well, that would be more along the lines of an introverted intuitive. Specifically, the soft-spoken, go with the flow type of attitude. IJs in general, though, that could just as easily be an ISTJ or an ISFJ. IJs, and I will always say this, IJs are noted for their laid-back approach to life because they prefer to perceive things internally before they make their rational decision about it. Denver Stewart says, hey, well, hello to you. What do INTJs struggle with a lot when it comes to romantic relationships? Showing affection is certainly going to be one of the hardest things for an INTJ. Specifically because introverted feeling is in that tertiary function slot. It's going to be something that they hold really deeply to them, but it's also something that's really uncomfortable to show. So that's definitely been my largest problem when it comes to relationships, is I struggle to show affection. But one thing people don't tend to realize, at least with me, is that people will call me calm, relaxed. They will say I'm zen-like in person. I have no temper. It's really hard to get me angry. I can get like playfully angry when I'm playing a video game or something, but I have almost no temper in reality. But that emotional stability and numbness, I want to say almost, not numbness because that sounds edgy, blunt affect kind of goes both ways. It's not just like, oh, I don't have much on the more negative side of emotional reactivity, where it's like, oh, I don't cry very often, or I don't get angry. I also don't show possible emotion in the exact same way. So there's a very slim and narrow range of emotional expression for me, and that also is included in relationships. Do I agree with Eric from talking with famous people? I can stop you right there. It's probably a no. No. The way of typing the polar, for example, the TI conditional logic test. No, I don't believe in that at all. I think it's not very good. I don't want to talk bad about other people on stream because I don't think that's fair to them if they're not around. Eric and I have tried talking before. He made a video yelling at me one time. It's just not one of the people in the community I'm interested in talking with too much. I don't think he's a bad person or anything. It's just our viewpoints conflict too much. I don't think polar testing is very good because I think the idea of the second 4 functions is against Jung's original interpretations and teaching. I don't think we employ the second 4 functions in the way that many socionics models assume. I think what they're instead recording is some of the aspects of the first 4 functions in ways that they're describing as being other functions. So, for example, polar FE in socionics is something along the lines of INTJs are going to struggle with showing emotions and being expressive about these emotions, or caring about the values of those around them, things of that nature. And I say I wouldn't describe that as FE. I would describe that as tertiary FI. It's FI that's already not in a great strong point in the personality stack, and it's introverted and personal, so it's lacking the qualities of extroverted feeling, and it's also not something that's going to be stronger in the personality. So extroverted feeling is just, it's not existent, it's just the tertiary FI giving off those qualities that they're associating with polar FE. But then again, you could really just boil that down to saying that it's the same thing. So that's why I don't get too mad at the socionics models, because I think they're just trying to attribute what is tertiary FI, for example, as polar or 7th, because I think the tertiary function is a troubling function in the psyche for a lot of a person's life. And it's something that you could easily see the opposite attitude of that function existing and having some sort of negative attribution with. God, that whole sentence was a mess. I need to learn how to talk. Insert type says hi. How do INTJs fare as leaders? Sorry, I skipped over your question, Rhythm Sony. I think INTJs can fare well as leaders if it's something that they want to be a leader in. You often don't find that INTJs are going to want to take up an active leadership position, like going out and being the forefront of the thing that they're leading. They more so want to have a position where they're in control and someone else can act as the face for the organization. So, for example, on my Discord server, while I run and operate the Discord, I have an ENTJ moderator and an INFJ moderator, but specifically these two people were people that I really enjoy having as moderators because they act as a face for the community, or when I need to get something done or I need to have something moderated, I can go to this ENTJ and he's super excited to go out there and deal with whatever needs to be dealt with. And that's very helpful for me as somebody who's not as overt with my thoughts and actions. What type do you... oh, this thing moved. What type do you think could be compatible with INFJ Enneagram 5? I'm sorry, I don't know too much about Enneagram to tell you. I know that Enneagram 5 is the thinker. I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I could tell you what types would likely get along with INFJs in a natural way, but I don't know if I could relate that to Enneagram and to make it meaningful. So I'm not sure if I want to give my input on that without actually knowing what I'm saying. And I apologize to anybody who's asking about Enneagram, and I'm like, oh, I just don't have a ton of information. Enneagram is one of those systems that to me, it doesn't hold nearly as much value as I mentioned earlier in the stream, the idea of Jung's 12 archetypes when it comes to things like core values. And I just realized how long my hair is. I haven't had a haircut in months because of the quarantine. How would an INTJ succeed as an entrepreneur? I consider myself a bit of an entrepreneur here because I run my own self-operated business and I have a YouTube channel. I would consider that relatively entrepreneurial. I think that INTJs are going to succeed in that, not through the sales and marketing aspect, as you might see with like an ENTP who has the FE to kind of back up their intuition. The INTJs are more going to just sheer force their professionalism or mastery over the topic and then let that be something that stands out as something representative of them and their work, and hopefully that can draw people in. But it often helps if an INTJ can get someone else to help them with their presentation. And that's something I've always thought about as someone who does my own presentation here on YouTube. Because if you look at my thumbnails on my channel, they're okay and they're good and all of that, but they could be better. A lot of the stuff on my channel could have more of that FE kind of draw towards it. And, these are things that really need to be accounted for if you want to take things to the next level. And I might even do that sometime in the future. Delta says, what's up? Hey, what's up? ENTJ dad here, not fun at all. Is Briggs astrology and psychology all connected? Astrology is a weird one to throw in there because astrology is something entirely different. Jung touched on astrology in his works because he was interested in the intuitive kind of symbology of astronomy, but he didn't attribute it any kind of meaning that you might see exactly the same with type or functions or overall psychology. But astrology is meaningful because it is a typology of symbols, and symbols stand in for psychic meaning. So people attribute to the symbols of astrology what they could be attributing to something else that also has inner psychic meaning, something like personality typology. What is the book? Jung's book on the collective unconscious talks about this in like the first chapter. I don't even know where my book is. Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious is what it's called. In the first chapter, he discusses the idea of inner psychic meaning relating to symbology and meaning. How can you determine if you're an ENTP or an INTP? Do you care more about the exploration of the thing that you're trying to understand, or do you care more about like finding the truth of what it is? Because the ENTPs, for example, tend to have more of that inventor archetype with them, where they're kind of interested in the thing and like the logic behind it, but they more so want to explore within that field, maybe even create. Whereas the INTPs tend to search and then try to find a really deep understanding of the thing that they're interested in. They want to build that incredibly subjective logical framework and understanding of the thing that they're studying, which gives them a fantastic academic and knowledge-based understanding of the thing that they're interested in if they do it correctly. INTPs are some of the most knowledgeable people on the planet if they're healthy. How did I overcome an eating problem as an INTJ? Yes, I did. I lost 130 pounds, and I've only gained like 10 or 15 back, and that's since I quit my job where I was quite active. So for me, I love food, and I love eating all the time. I put myself on a calorie-restricted diet, and I stuck to it obsessively. Like, I gave no grounds for not, like, I counted all of my calories. I weighed my food on a scale to know if I was getting as many calories as I needed, or making sure I didn't have too many. If I ate a single potato chip, I would log it in my log. And it was through doing that for about a year, that I shifted my entire mindset to become entirely conscious of these things. If it were up to me, I would eat all day, every day. I love food. I talk about food all the time. If you're on my Discord every morning, you'll hear me talk about bacon, just because I love to wake up and have my bacon sandwich every morning. But it is something that I have to force myself to not do, to be aware of. And I feel like that's a lot of the struggles people have with the repressed function, is forcing themselves to be consciously aware of the issues that they're having with it. What are your thoughts on photosynthesis? Heard it's a growing science. Photosynthesis is a member on the Discord, so hello. Yes. At insert type I is spelled as I. Oh my goodness, I gotta scroll and find. Sir, since you mentioned Virgil the other day, what are your thoughts on Devil May Cry 5? One of my favorite games. I love Devil May Cry 5. I think it was very well done. I've beaten it multiple times. I did the Bloody Palace mode with Dante, which was a pain in the butt. It took me like a week. I just love the Devil May Cry series. I wish they would release Virgil as an add-on character. But, I know that's a thing on the PC modded version, but I don't like to play mods too much. I much prefer kind of like the original package. Sometimes I'll play a mod, though. I typed agree in the Discord, but I wasn't granted permission into the chat. You have to make sure you type $agree, because that's what prompts the command. So if that's the struggle you're having in the Discord, make sure you type in one question mark and then the word agree. Sometimes the bot does go down, but like if I look now, I'm pretty sure the bot's yes. DynoBot is up, so there should be no problem getting into the server if you agree to the rules. How should I as an INTJ do things I don't find meaningful? By forcing yourself to. That's the only issue. INTJs are going to have the whole Gamma quadrant, or I'm pretty sure it's Gamma's, INTJ, or NTJ's SFPs, are the types who are going to have the hardest time doing things they don't want to do. Because FI and NI are so stubborn and personal in terms of personal interest and values. So the SFPs and the NTJs really struggle with doing things that they don't want to do, and they're going to push back against these things a lot. You really just have to force yourself and realize that that's what you got to do sometimes, especially if it's related to the thing that you're interested in some way, shape, or form. Excuse me. I've been in quarantine for like 3 months, so this is the most I've talked in a long time, so I'm probably going to lose my voice after this. In an older video, you said that the introverted function and extroverted function are two sides of one coin instead of a spectrum. Is it possible that there's an overlap between the two opposite attitudes? That's hard, because I think yes and no. Specifically, if you're looking at how Jung defined the attitudes of, and how each function, how strong it was. So there's a wonderful image, and if there was a way for me to share images here in the chat, I would. There probably is. But what I'm essentially saying is that Jung talks about the idea that the dominant and repressed function together, both of them, make up about 70% of the personality. Not just the dominant function, but the dominant and the repressed function together. And the auxiliary and tertiary function lie in the middle. He drew it as a circle. And imagine that the top half of the circle is your dominant function. The bottom half is the repressed function. So the dominant exists in this dominant state consciousness. And then the bottom half of the circle is black and exists in unconsciousness. So in the center, there's essentially two little triangles on each side. One of them represents the auxiliary function. One of them represents the tertiary function. And there's this balancing thing in the middle that shifts which one is which and which one is more so into consciousness and more so into unconsciousness. And I believe that the pull of the dominant function and the repressed function is so strong that they will stay in their attitude always. Like, you're not going to find an INTJ who's employing extroverted intuition in a meaningful way. But I think that the auxiliary and tertiary functions can show attributes of being in the opposite attitude. So, for example, I think, say, maybe an INTJ could theoretically still somewhat employ attributes of extroverted feeling because the pull isn't so strong into that one attitude. it's a little bit over the line in terms of introversion and extroversion, which isn't the case with the dominant and repressed. So in certain scenarios, you might find that maybe an INFJ shows slight signs of extroverted thinking if they are a well-developed person. But I don't think that these are entirely different functions or that they exist in some 4 function slots after the original 4. I still think they're a function in that particular slot. So, you know, the introverted feeling could theoretically employ as or show some traits of extroverted feeling. It's a hard concept to explain without the image that I want you to see. If you stop in the Discord sometime after this, I can share that image. It's in Jung's volume 13, I think, Alchemy and Psychology, where he talks about the consciousness. Someone shared it with me, and it was really fascinating and eye-opening. The image he drew of consciousness in relation to typology. Oh, if you look at my website, asurapsych.com, and go to the blog section, I made a blog post where it's in an image. So that's, if you want to see that image, just quickly go to asurapsych.com. I feel like I got off track there. Oh no, I think I answered that one well. Lost my train of thought. What's NI's and FI's relation with images as Jung defined them? Also, is NI closer to the perception of archetypes as they appear in the world rather than the world itself? Yeah. Well, NI, it's in and of itself is going to be very, I don't want to say symbolic, because SI tends to be more so the function associated with symbolism. The NI tends to be more associated with the underlying archetype and meaning of symbols, if that makes more sense. SI types tend to place value in the idea of symbology, where excuse me, I'm losing my voice cracking, going through puberty again, where NI tends to be, again, more interested in the meaning behind symbology. What advice would you give to an INTJ who hasn't found their passion even after pursuing everything they've been interested in? So this is a hard question, and I whenever I get an INTJ in my business coaching, or just in my coaching in general, I have to work with somebody who has introverted feeling. It's hard because I can't tell you what your introverted feeling and passion is going to be. I can't tell you what's meaningful to you, and that's one of the hardest and most disappointing thing about working with types is I can't tell you what your meaning is. But the best thing you can do is realize that if you're only staying where you are and you think you've explored everything, you probably haven't. You know, find something that makes you excited to do, that makes you want to learn more about it, and then grasp onto that thread and follow it. Even if it's just like a single hair in size, like it's the thinnest interest you have right now, grab that and follow it for a little bit and see if it leads to maybe something more. Maybe it'll lead you to a whole new nest of opportunities. What type would survive the best in isolation during the quarantine? I think INTJs tend to be doing quite well right now. INTPs are probably the INTs are probably the types who are really just doing okay with the quarantine, because they are definitely the least social. What topics am I planning to touch on later in the future? Well, as a lot of you know, I'm a student of psychology overall, not just someone who's interested in typology. And you've seen me do a few videos in the past on things like personality disorders. Moving forward, I want to do more stuff related to psychopathology because I want to be a clinical psychologist. So this channel isn't always going to be just typology. It's eventually going to move into more of a general field of psychology thing with a strong influence from typology still being a major factor. And that's the reason I changed the channel name from Asura MBTI to Asura Psych. And oh, what is this? Did somebody hit me with the super chat? Wow, Grave. Oh, it's Grave. Good buddy of mine. What kind of powers do ENFPs have? What kind of power are we talking about? Superpowers? Or social powers? So we're talking social powers. ENFPs have the ability to make almost any time a good time. Oh, goodness, I don't think you all can hear it because I've got my PC thing muted for the stream, but like the notification sound is really loud. ENFPs can just liven up a room, I think is really one of the strengths of just the EFPs in general. ESFPs too. But ENFPs are really nice to talk to in terms of conversation because they can keep it going. Like if you put 3 INTJs into a room with each other, they're going to run out of things to talk about in like 10 minutes because they're just kind of keeping things to themselves. Their intuition's private. They don't want to share if it's not something that's going to be discussed on further. But ENFPs are just, they've always got something to say. They've always got a new idea. They've always got something going. And I think that's really, in terms of communication, that's something that draws in INTJs at least. So thank you, Grave, for the super chat. I greatly appreciate it. You can pretty much buy me lunch. What types would you say are compatible with an INTP? Well, INTPs tend to do well with, I don't know. I've actually never thought about that too much. I think they could do well with maybe an ENTP or maybe even like an EFJ, because I think that FE value could be very interesting for them. I know a lot of people say INTPs and ESFJs, despite you thinking they won't work very well, can be a very rewarding relationship. I also think INTPs could get along well with maybe like an INFJ. I think those are just general types that could do well with an INTP. It really kind of depends on what the INTP is really interested in and how well developed their FE is. Because an INTP in their 20s is going to be way different than an INTP in their 30s. Have I played the Souls games, Asura? Yes, I have, Delta. I've played all of them, and including... Well, no, I haven't played Demon Souls, so I can't say I played all of them. But I played Dark Souls 1 many times. Dark Souls 2 I've played like 3 or 4 times. I got to New Game plus 10 on Dark Souls 3. I love Dark Souls 3, and I 100%ed Sekiro in the first 2 days of its release. I have a picture of me getting the achievement where it was like 0.01% of the gamers in the planet having that 100%. That's my problem, is when I get a new game, especially one in the Souls series, I like nonstop do that for like 3 days because I love them. I just drain all the enjoyment out of them until there's nothing left. But I love the Dark Souls series. And especially as an introverted intuitive, and what most people don't understand about the Souls series is that it has such a really deep story. You just have to find it for yourself or go to someone like Vadi Vidya's YouTube channel and he'll teach you the story. But it's very intuitive. It's or deeply intuitive. It's not openly intuitive. Like, it's not easy to understand just looking at it. But the underlying meaning and hidden messages of the Dark Souls series are really interesting to me. Insert type says my thumbnails are the best. Well, thank you. It's really basic Photoshop. I taught myself how to do like the most basic things on Photoshop, and I just pick cool images off of Google. I'm expecting one day an artist to reach out to me like, hey, you used my art without asking, and I'll be like, all right. But everybody does that on YouTube, so. How do you think an INTJ can find its purpose? Well, as I kind of mentioned with somebody earlier, I can't tell you what your purpose is as an FI user. You have to go and follow the threads of what are interesting and meaningful to you until they lead to something larger. Scrolling past the Grave super chat again. I am thirsty. It's 1:07 right now here, so we'll go for about another 50 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, depending on if my voice can hold up. I just want to say thank you again to everybody who stopped in right now just to say hi and talk. I really enjoy doing these live streams. And again, thank you to my patrons who support me and this channel. As of right now, I'm trying to do 1 video a week. I'd like to go back to more. The problem is that during quarantine, there's people home more often. So I only have 2 days a week where I can record where there's nobody in the house. So that's why as soon as the quarantine started, I had to switch down to 1 video a week. I guess in theory I could do 2, but I really don't like the idea of recording more than 1 video in 1 day because I get burnt out. My creative energy goes away quite quickly if I'm forced to do 2 in 1 day. But I guess I could just suck it up and do it. Jung was interested in Buddhism. That probably inspired the circle image. He even wrote the foreword to a book teaching the Buddhist school. Yeah, Jung was interested in just general world religion and philosophy altogether. He was so well educated on these things. It's baffling. How would you contrast INTJs to ENTJs? I'm an INTJ 516 when I do something like play Apex Legends. I can come off like an ENTJ. That's funny. So I play Apex Legends too, Zen, and it's when I get into games like that, specifically Apex Legends, it's easy for me to go into my TE, like take charge mode. For example, I play Crypto, and one of the reasons they're like, why do you play Crypto? He's bad. And it's like, well, because if I can see the situation I'm in, I can tell everybody what they need to do. I play as a strategist support role when I play in games like Apex Legends, and I always say that the main character from the anime Log Horizon reminds me of how I play Apex Legends, because he's like a strategist who sits back and he helps people find out what they need to do, and he's not so overt about it. But yeah, ENTJs though I tend to be far more aggressive. One of my moderators, Madshot, on the Discord server is an ENTJ, and he's very, very aggressive in his playstyle for anything that he plays. And there's usually this patience in the INTJs that isn't there in the ENTJs. I didn't mention Bloodborne. Delta, I'm sorry I didn't mention Bloodborne. I played it once. I'm an Xbox person. I have a PlayStation 4, but I don't really turn it on that much. I played Bloodborne one time. I didn't like it as much as Dark Souls. It's just preference. The whole like Lovecraftian-esque thing isn't as much as my style. Is more of the kind of mystic thing that Dark Souls had. Yes, sorry. How often do I do live streams? I try to do them once a month, but the past few months have been really weird with the quarantine and all that. So it's been a little bit harder to, I don't know, just find time when I have the house to myself to do these types of things. I would like to maybe eventually start doing them more than once a month. But I feel like if you look at somebody like Frank James, who I'm sure 90% of you know who Frank James is, he does a live stream every Sunday where he puts on a little costume or something and he makes it themed. And I don't think I could ever really be that type of person. I'm not an entertainer at heart. As you can probably see by this stream, it's just me answering questions. So I feel like it might get boring for some people to just come in and ask me questions all the time, like every week, and just do the same thing. So that's why I try to limit that down to more like once a month, maybe once every 2 months. But I really enjoy doing the live streams. It might not look like it right now because you're seeing me in like this very talkative mode, but this level of engagement is really, like, it burns me out. Like the TE mode is something I can only exist within for a while. After the live stream, I always go and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I need to go for a walk. I need to relax. I need to listen to music, because it really burns me out to be like in this much of like extroverted kind of interactive mode. I'm much more of a contemplative and reflective type person. Zen says you play Caustic. Caustic was my main before Crypto came out. I just like Crypto because he's cool. I love the idea of the eye in the sky, like archetype kind of thing. Let's see. Thoughts on the legacy of Freud in academic literature to almost complete exclusion of Jung's ideas? It's really interesting. I am writing a fantasy series because you're right. Freud is so much more talked about in psychology, especially in formal teachings of psychology. I think we only talked about Jung in like 2 of my classes, which baffles me if you look at Jung's work, because it's like leagues beyond, like way beyond most of the people we talked about in every sense of the word. I think the reason the scientific community won't discuss Jung so much is because he was so theoretical. He didn't care much about actual application in the way that you're going to see in academia that really wants this like TI understanding of why things work. They want to be able to quantify it and measure it. And look, the reason Jung never quantified typology was because he didn't think it needed to be quantified in that way. He thought it was more applicable as a theory. He thought it could be used more so as something, as a framework, a frame of reference for understanding the human psyche, perception, and cognition. So he just thought, like, here's my theory on this, and if this theory helps people, that's quite good, and this is how I understand this theory in all of its depth. Definitely not Velcro, says Xbox Boo. So I actually just bought a $1,500 gaming PC because my last one died on me and I had the money for it. I spent like all my money, all my savings, but I really wanted a new computer because I have to edit on the computer too. So I've been playing on PC more, but the thing I like about Xbox is you can stream your Xbox to your PC. So I can be a PC gamer and an Xbox gamer. I mean, in like 2 or 3 years, there's not going to be a difference between Xbox and PC because Xbox is going to have the thing where you can play all your Xbox games on your PC. I mean, you can already do that now with the streaming. How do you take risks as an INTJ? I don't often take risks unless I absolutely have to. Now, I enjoy like the short-term risks, like in, video games. I love the idea of kind of like gambling a little bit with money and stuff. I really enjoy the idea of luck, and maybe that's just the repressed extroverted sensing wanting to kind of get that rush from being in the moment and taking chances. But in terms of long-term life, I don't very rarely take chances at all. Is it common for INTJ to suck at strategy games? Kind of, yeah. Like, unless it's something that they're really interested in. People always say that INTJs love chess, and in reality, I don't think you're going to find many INTJs who are really, really interested in chess. The INTPs tend to be interested in chess because chess isn't like real life. And this is a quote from somebody else, but I've always thought this. Chess isn't real life because in real life, not everybody starts with the same pieces. And if you look at how an INTP and an INTJ view life, an INTJ wants to win the game by having better pieces. So they're going to go out and bust their tail so they can get better pieces. So when they start the game of chess, they have 7 queens. But chess is a game where everybody always starts with the same pieces. And that's not how I as an individual view life. If I want to get ahead in life, I go out and push myself to get more pieces. So strategy games to me, especially where it's ones where it's harder to kind of, where everybody starts exactly the same, isn't something I'm always going to enjoy. I like games where there's a chance to kind of get that leg up in different ways. I just saw my webcam do a weird flash, so I might have kicked the wire. Let me just make sure the thing is still working. Yeah, it looks like it is. Okay. How does one lose apathy? Find meaning. Apathy, as kind of Jung put it, the general neurosis of our times is not that people have no meaning, it's that they've lost their meaning. It's a Jung quote. Jung quote. Neurosis. I don't know if I can find it off the top of my head, but I have frequently seen people become neurotic when they content themselves with inadequate or wrong answers to the questions of life. They seek position, marriage, reputation, outward success, and money, and remain unhappy and neurotic even when they have attained what they were seeking. Such people are usually confined within too narrow a spiritual horizon. Their life has not sufficient content, sufficient meaning. If they are enabled to develop into more, there's a pop-up, into more spacious personalities, the neurosis generally disappears. Carl Jung. I don't know what book that was from or if he just said it. Do I see Frank James as an INFJ? I think so. I've actually met Frank James in video call and voice chat a few times. We talk every now and then. I try not to bother him too much because he's like leagues ahead of me as a YouTuber, and I don't feel like it's kind of like appropriate for me to be reaching out to an actual giant in the typology community, especially when his stuff is more entertainment and casually educational. This channel tends to have almost a formalness to it that I think can be off-putting to a lot of the other people in the community. But when I met Frank James, he was a very nice person. He's one of my favorite people in the community. I really enjoy speaking with Frank James. What kind of music do you prefer to listen to? So I would be lying if I said one of the most influential bands in my life wasn't Linkin Park. I've always loved Linkin Park. Their music is very intuitive and emotional. I think it hits both on the NI and the FI because of the authenticity of the feelings they had, which was even more amplified when Chester committed suicide a few years ago. Another band that I'm a really big fan of is Starset. Melodic kind of orchestral rock music that I can really daydream extensively to is the type of music I really enjoy. I really dislike party music. Just, like let's have a good time type of music. It's just not something I get anything out of. And there's nothing against it. It's just, not my type of thing. ISTPs are seen in every kind of game, especially fighting games. My favorite fighting game of all time, Blaze Blue, it's an anime fighting game. The main character's name is Ragnar the Blood Edge, and I think he's an ISTP, and I think it's funny that you bring that up. By the way, Blaze Blue, awesome fighting game series, really deep story, highly recommended if you enjoy games with stories that are good. I wish Young was mentioned more often. Hey, putting it all out there, shout out to you, by the way. Thanks for stopping into the stream. Yeah, Young is unfortunately not mentioned much in terms of the typology community these days is people want to completely abandon Jung. And I think that's one of the issues is that, you know, most of the people out here developing their own theories and systems don't even know the advanced interpretations of the thing that they're making a new system out of. And that really is a struggle. And that's one of the reasons I teach what I teach on my channel, is because I feel like if I can give people the correct information that Jung was presenting, if I could say, here's where Jung's idea, I know that here were Jung's ideas, I know they were quite hard to understand and conceptualize at points, but maybe I can narrow them down and make them easily presentable in a way that the community can kind of understand his original interpretations. And then they can move from there. Because I don't think it's bad to want to develop new systems of personality, but I think most people don't have solid enough foundations to do it accurately. Especially the issue you see a lot of people in the typology community have is that none of them have ever taken like a psychometrics class in their life, especially not a graduate level psychometrics class. I haven't even taken one. I have a bachelor's in psychology, and psychometrics is one of the classes you take as in a master's program. So I've got a long way to go, and many of these people aren't even close to understanding how you really create a real personality assessment or underlying system related to it. Definitely not Velcro. Oh, I know who that is. Actual rotisserie chicken. There's an actual rotisserie chicken in my chat, which is an inside joke. Sorry for anyone who's wondering what that is. Rip Chester, yes, Rip Chester. When Nietzsche is describing Superman, he seems to be describing INTJ. I don't know about that. Maybe. I think Nietzsche, a lot of people think he was an INTJ, but I don't know. I can't read Nietzsche without going crazy because he's got that whole like complex way of saying things that bores me. Like, all right, did I catch up to the questions? Oh no! Quick, everybody, 4 questions. No, I'm just kidding. Oh no! I it brought me down to the bottom of the list, so I missed some. Why is INTJ intuition dominant and thinking extroverted when the judging function is meant to be dominant? Never understood this. Because the judging function isn't meant to be dominant, drunk, and meerkat. The J in the personality type means that the judging function is extroverted. Just as the P means the perceiving function is extroverted. So what you then do is you match the function that is associated with the dominant energy of the type. So say for an INTJ, introversion is their dominant energy. You match that to the function of the top two, and that becomes the dominant. So that's why INTJs have extroverted thinking, but extroverted thinking, because it's extroverted, is secondary to the introverted attitude of intuition. Or if you see the ENTJ, who also has TE and NI, they have extroverted thinking, which matches the extroverted attitude of the type, and therefore they are an ENTJ TE NI type. Whew. German technology system. All right. How do you experience and fear SE grips if you believe in grips? Well, yeah, I believe in grips quite a lot because Jung talked extensively about, I don't know if I would call them grips, but essentially they're the influence of the repressed function. So for me, my biggest issue with repressed extroverted sensing is, for one, as many as you know, I struggle with food. I love food. I used to weigh 300 pounds. I lost a ton of weight. That was a battle that I won, but am still fighting. I have to battle with myself, and I will have to battle with myself the rest of my life regarding food because of how much I enjoy it. And, you know, it's like when I go out to restaurants and stuff, my wife always says that, like, you know, I feel like I lose you when there's food in front of you. Like, you disconnect from the entire situation. And it's true. Like, when there's food in front of me and I'm eating, it's like I'm zoned in on it. And I think it's like literal food addiction. Other than that, I really struggle with kind of just living in the moment, being somebody who's present without trying to find meaning everywhere. That's one of the things I struggle with about, like, going to bars and clubs, things of that nature. Every now and then my wife will drag me out to one. And it's just not enjoyable to me because I don't know how to live in the moment. It just doesn't come naturally to me. I'm always, like, when I look at somebody across the room, I see a story unfold. I'm seeing, you know, something about their life. And that when there's 100 people around you, and every time you look at somebody, you're trying to find some sort of meaning, it's exceptionally overwhelming. Monopoly for the win. Sam Jackson asks, what's my IQ? I talk about this in my last stream, and people tend to ask me this all the time. I have taken a formally administered IQ test, but I also have average scores. I suspect that my average IQ is somewhere in the low 130s, with my verbal being in the high 130s, although I technically tested higher than that on a formally administered ways. But I studied for 1 month exclusively nonstop for that IQ test. So that skews the score. And also, IQ tests have a test-retest variability of between like 9 and 11 points. So if you know what is going to be on an IQ test before you take it, you go up almost an entire standard deviation. So if you took my score from that IQ test and then took away the points that would have been test-retest variability, and then maybe even a little bit more because I studied for so long. So let's say you subtracted, like almost an entire standard deviation down. That would bring my verbal into the low 130s and my overall into the high 120s. But I score on average 125 on most tests, but IQ is IQ. I don't really think about it too much. I don't think it's the perfect measurement for intelligence. And well, IQ is important in terms of intelligence, but I think that dedication can far outweigh IQ in many, many, many situations. What are my thoughts on Nietzsche? I like Nietzsche's kind of philosophies and approaches to life. I haven't read much of him. He's just not one of those people I've put a lot of typical interest in. I don't read as much as I should. Like, I've read the most important parts of psychological types, but I have like 3 young books that I've bought and barely cracked open. And it's because I like to just explore things as they interest me. So especially people like Nietzsche, who have very thick and hard and difficult to understand reading, it's not someone I want to be reading. I'm going to find myself reading too much. I respect Freud for helping popularize psychology, but he always came off to me as repressed and frustrated me. Yeah, I do think Freud. I just love to say Freud because it's wrong. I think his insights are exceptionally valuable because his ideas and understanding of the ideas of subconscious were really important for the time that he was in. So I really respect what he did in terms of overall relation to psychology, and he certainly had very deep thoughts. He may not have had the exact same thoughts as Jung, and that's why you saw they split, but, how do you stop procrastinating as an INTJ? I procrastinate more than I should. You get into the good habits. It boils down to the idea that you have to get into the habit of doing things, and that's what I talk about in my developing extroverted thinking video. The idea that like you have to get into the good habits and start small. Like, give yourself small tasks. And even people like Jordan Peterson discuss the idea of like, cleaning your room, making your bed, because these small steps are the first thing in a positive feedback loop of positive behavior. When you talk about things like cognitive behavioral therapy, when you're working with a client or patient who's trying to overcome something, you start with the first step and then you work from there. You have to start small so the positive feedback loop can establish itself. So you feel good about completing one thing, then you feel more confident in engaging with another activity, and you will strive harder to complete it because you understand that you will feel good about completing it. Insert type says, bye, sir. This was great. Well, thanks for stopping in. We'll probably run for another 30 minutes until 2 o'clock. As usual, that's how long the streams last. These streams always fly by. See if there's anything I missed. We got about 4 to 7 people watching. Noodly Chaotic Mind says, I just got into Jung. He's confusing, yet I'm enjoying his work a lot. Yeah, my problem with Jung's work is it's so dense. It's just something that I'm like, if I was in like a car ride or something and I had a long time where I was bored, I would find myself reading. Sir, did you watch the new Rick and Morty episodes? Yeah, I did. I really liked the train one. And then the one from 2 nights ago was pretty good too. It was enjoyable. I really enjoy Rick and Morty as a show because it does have kind of that meta level to it. It's very much like a intuitively designed show. It's directed towards the NTPs, I think. But as an NTJ, I quite enjoy it as well. Okay, scrolling up. Sometimes I just forget that I'm here on stream and I'm like just reading the comments and I'm like, oh wait, I'm supposed to be saying something. Like, because that's how I am at home. I'm just like 99% of the time just like staring at my computer, not doing anything meaningful. All right, well, I'm pretty caught up on the questions. If anybody wants to support me on Patreon, by the way, I know I bring this up like every 30 minutes, but you know, it is always greatly appreciated. I do have a brand new tier there where it's the most expensive one. Honestly, I'm not sure if I expect anyone to actually do it, but if you subscribe to that tier, you can choose a video topic for me to do. And I thought that would just be an interesting thing to do. But other than that, I greatly appreciate anybody who would like to support me on Patreon or with the one-time thing here with the super chat. You know. Also, typing sessions. If you want to have a personality typing session, work with me to help you find your type. Check out asurapsych.com, my website. I also do personality coaching and professional coaching. In my bachelor's studies as a student, I took career counseling, so I've got a good enough understanding to work as a basic life coach using Jungian concepts as a foundation for that coaching. Do you know your Enneagram and what do you think about it? I'm a 5-wing 4 and I'm not a huge Enneagram fan. Earlier in the stream, I talked about the idea that I prefer Jung's 12 extended archetypes because they discuss the same thing as Enneagram, but they're closer to what I think is actually accurate, and it's more so symbolic and meaningful in terms of archetypes, and I just enjoy archetypes overall. I think Enneagram is so blunt and plain that it's hard for me to be interested in it because the archetypes that are presented aren't very interesting. I label the things I do as productive and a waste of time, but I feel bad because 70% of my day is a waste of time. What are you doing? Dude, like 90% of my day every day is a waste of time. Like, I'm not kidding. I waste so much time. Like, you wouldn't believe how much time I waste. Especially, like, if it's a day where I can't record because somebody's home, I'll just sit at home on my computer and play a video game or relax, watch YouTube, go for a walk. It's just like, I'm not the most productive person, so. What were the 2 books that I recommended for MBTI? Okay, so I have a video on this, by the way, called MBTI Books I Recommend, or Books I Recommend for Learning MBTI. But the #1 book always is Gifts Differing, the book written by Briggs on MBTI. It is source material for learning MBTI. If you want to learn actual MBTI theory, Gifts Differing is the book. Now, if you want to take it deeper and go into a further understanding, Psychological Types by Carl Jung is his original interpretation and writings of the functions that he created. But I wouldn't recommend Psychological Types first, which may sound weird because it came before, but Psychological Types is dense, and I think Gifts Differing is the perfect introduction, even for somebody who's quite well versed in MBTI, because then you can really see where Briggs is coming from and why she developed the system the way she did. And then when you backtrack to Jung, you'll be like, oh, I see how she came to this conclusion. Okay, let's see, where did I go? As an INTJ, do you ever overestimate how long something will take you to do? I tend to underestimate how efficient I am when I have full concentration on the thing. Yeah, I always give myself more time than needed to complete a task, just to make sure I have enough time to do it. So I would say that's probably I wouldn't say it's an issue, though. It's just kind of an extroverted thinking approach to life. What is your thought about visual typing? Okay, so my general approach with visual typing, or what they call voltology, is that I believe that visual typing is a decent aid in finding someone's type, but it is never a conclusion about someone's type. So, for example, when I'm working with somebody in a typing session, and if I see them looking up, doing this, they're talking really fast, they're jumping from one idea to the next, or they're building upon things very quickly, or noticing the relationships between those things, you might be able to say that they're an EP, because EPs tend to have this type of style when talking, but it's never definitive. I'm never going to say that that defines them as an EP. It's saying, oh, well, I suspect they're likely an EP, and they have this thing that I'm noticing in them that is common with EPs. So that is a good trait for that, or a good way to like check a mark for that type. Say, maybe it could be this type. Random person said, oh, hey, Ellie here. Hey, Ellie, thanks for stopping by again. Don't worry about the dishes. I appreciate you stopping into the stream. We're going to run for about 30 more minutes. I think even INTJ is going to have a pleaser syndrome. What do you think? Well, kind of, yeah. I'm very much the kind of person who doesn't mind helping someone in need. If I can, but just the general idea of willingness to help could also be just a general personality trait, not associated entirely with type. Now, of course, like ENFJs are usually going to be more willing to help than, say, like an INTP, but yeah. I don't think that INTJs tend to have the same type of people pleaser syndrome. I think they're very willing to meet that requirement if it's something that will help them in their goals. Like, for example, when I worked at a lab in my university under a professor, I was very much the type of person where he was like, hey, I need this thing done. And I was like, all right, I'm on it. Like, you know, because it was beneficial to me to stand out as a productive person. Do you find yourself as an INTJ attracted to ENTP characters? Now, I find myself attracted to ENTP characters in terms of like fictional coolness. I mean, ENTPs tend to have that interesting thing to them, like Tony Stark is very interesting. But NTPs are the types that I struggle to communicate with more than any others personally, and it's just because complete function axis switch. NE TI is critical, and NE wants to play with ideas where NI wants to narrow it down. And when you combine NE with TI, it can be very annoying for an INTJ who's NITE. It's very easy for NTPs and NTJs to cross wires, especially when one's an intuitive dominant and one's a thinking dominant. Like an INTP and an ENTJ are probably going to get along much better than an INTP and an INTJ. I haven't seen Hunter x Hunter. Sorry, Delta. I do watch quite a bit of anime, but I haven't seen that one. I spend a lot of time observing and therefore procrastinating for what I need to do. However, I know that my T will get things done efficiently when I decide to them. Yes. Pudding. About diet. Most of the time you're hungry is there. Yeah. Yeah, I used to, I just realized the camera's probably shaking because I bounce my leg when I'm just sitting here. I used to find like cheat ways to get food that I enjoyed during my diet. So I really enjoy cheese dip. So I would just get cheese dip with like a bag of steamed veggies, and it would still be less calories than like a normal meal, and I got to have cheese dip. So you got to just find ways to cheat the system every now and then. I read on the internet about the 4 sides of the mind. What are your thoughts about that? That's C.S. Joseph's theory. I don't agree with it, but it's not because I don't know. Again, it strays too far from Jung's interpretation. The idea that all 8 functions are employed is not something that we see in Jung's work, at least in the extent that you're going to find in models like socionics or 4 sides of the mind. So I'm not a huge fan of it, and I don't particularly believe in transition in that type of way either, the way that C.S. Joseph proposes. But I don't know, that's hard to say. I'm not J514, and I find that without Enneagram, I'm missing piece that INTJ doesn't explain. I see a lot of people say that about Enneagram, that they feel like Enneagram is like the missing piece of the puzzle. I don't personally feel that way. I looked into Enneagram, I looked into the types, I looked into the core values, and I got nothing out of it. Like to me, it wasn't valuable. But that's because I never really struggled with my type as much as some other people did. I settled into my type very early on into my type journey, and I've explored it as possibilities of others' types every now and then, but I'm very, very confident in my type. I know my values as an individual, so I don't find myself looking to Enneagram for these types of things. Enneagram seems much more basically apparent to me, and it's just a typology that I'm not a huge fan of, and that's the reason I don't study it much, is because I don't think it has as much intrinsic value as Jung's theory. I'll drink some water. Yeah, Zen, INTJ and ENTP, Stark and Strange. Yeah, I love Doctor Strange. I do think he's an INTJ in the Avengers movies. Doctor Strange is my favorite Marvel movie that's not like one of the Avengers ones, because the Avengers movies are pretty good. Do I like spicy food? I do like spicy food. I like pretty spicy. I don't like Eastern spicy, because if you go to like an Indian restaurant and you get spicy food, it's a whole different story. One time we went to an Indian restaurant. It was on Christmas, and the only reason I remember that is because Indian restaurants are one of the only places open on Christmas. And I asked the lady. She was like, "How hot do you want your food?" on like 1 to 5, 5 being the hottest. And I was like, well, I like spicy food. So she says 4, and she looks at me and she puts a hand on my shoulder and she goes, are you sure? And I was like, oh boy, I'm in for a ride. And I got the 4 and I couldn't finish it because it was so spicy. But I like spicier than most people, but not Eastern spicy. That's the easiest way to say it. How do I deal with negative emotions later on? I very much mull. I don't know if that's what you want to call NIFI, but I am not expressive about my emotions. I'm not explosive in the slightest. I don't cry, like, ever really. I just mull. Like, if I have an issue, I will sit or I will go for a walk and I will think about it. I will just process it. Internal processing is how I deal with emotions that are negative. What do I think about temperament? Temperament's okay, but it ignores functions, so it's harder. The only thing I think that's useful in temperament is, like, with the Keirsey temperament sorter, for example, they use it for business coaching and assessment because, you know, even if an INFP and an ENFJ have completely different functions, you might find that their core values are going to be very similar. Both types, for example, could very likely end up as a psychologist, whereas NTs could very much end up in things like the sciences. I think those temperaments are okay. Oh, SJ and SP as well. I don't know why in their temperament they divide them in that specific way. It seems weird to me because then it specifically gets rid of the idea of it. It's just weird. I don't know why they did it like that. What are my thoughts on Dave's superpowers objective personality? So I've talked about this every now and then, and I met with Dave one time, and so there's kind of two approaches I have to this, and I never want to offend people in the objective personality system or community. I am very much a critic of their system when it comes from a psychometric standpoint. Looking at it as a student of the social and quantitative side of psychology, someone who has a degree in psychology, it's a little bit messy. It's the idea of quantifying it is something that's going to be very difficult for them. They misconstrue inter-rater reliability for constructibility, which is another problem. For example, they use the method where they say if two people are in a different room looking at, you know, the same thing and they can come to the same conclusion on it, it must be valid, which is not true at all if you've ever taken a psychology class focused on quantitative methods. Inter-rater reliability simply says that the two people agree on the same thing. It doesn't say that the thing that they're agreeing on is true. So they have a fundamental misattribution there. But in other ways, their values and the things that they're studying are meaningful. Like, they taught me something that I thought was really interesting in one of their videos. They proposed the idea, this goes along well with Jung's idea, that the center two functions are relatively balanced. Dave watched a video and he saw someone critique somebody, and then he paused the video and he said, well, I think that their thinking functions first and their feeling functions third, so they're relatively balanced. So I'm willing to bet that after this critique or compliment, whichever one was first, they're going to do the opposite. So if they gave a compliment and T and F are in the center, there's a good chance that they're going to critique them right after, or if they critique them first, they're going to compliment them right after. And I was like, oh wow, that's really interesting. I never thought about that. But I notice, as someone who's a TF center 2 type myself, that's something I tend to do. If I give someone that thinking, like, hey, you know, critique, I usually try to back it up with like but you know, it'll be fine because this is why. And I think that they've really given some decent insights onto personality typology. I'm also not a fan of their masculine-feminine system because I think that functions are inherently masculine or feminine. And I have a blog post about that I'm thinking about publishing on my site here soon. I've already finished it, I just haven't put it up yet. But again, it's nothing against the objective personality people overall. It's just I don't think their system's very good from a psychometric standpoint. It's certainly not objective, and sadly, that's the case for now. They could benefit greatly by hiring a PhD in psychometrics to come in and sort their system. It would be expensive, but that's the only way the academic community would ever take it seriously. How to convince an ENTJ that typology isn't BS? Show them how useful it can be. Give them a reason to believe that it's useful to them. I feel like I got lost in wherever I was. Oh, here we go. What about Death Note? I like Death Note. It's very much like an NTJ, NTP rivalry kind of show. What do I think about emotional intelligence? Is it the same level as street smart? No. And so emotional intelligence, EQ, is something that we do measure separately from IQ, because people can have exceptionally high IQ and almost no EQ, or they can have fairly good EQ and fairly good IQ. But the problem is EQ holds nowhere near the same psychometric validation as IQ, because EQ is also relative to your community, your environment, your culture. So someone who has low emotional intelligence in one situation could theoretically have a much better version of it in a environment that was a better fit to their temperament. So you have to look at it from a sociological perspective as well when you're talking about EQ, because IQ tends to be, for the most part, it's something that we can measure across culture. It doesn't work as well when you attempt to do it without cultural influence. Like if you get rid of verbal intelligence from IQ, then the correctness of the measurement goes down. So it's going to be less certain. But it's something that we can still confidently say within a certain range is pretty good. But EQ is much harder to do when you're, or much harder to measure without looking at it from a sociological standpoint. Are certain types more susceptible to a certain set of cognitive biases? And if so, is it linked to the dominant function? Well, yes. Specifically, introverted judging types tend to be the types, introverted judging dominant types tend to be very prone to biases that they hold true to themselves. But cognitive biases can also be applied to the introverted dominant perceiving types as well in a different manner. It's just the things that they get attached to tend to cause certain biases. INTPs and ISTPs will struggle with logical biases often once they've attached themselves to a logic that they're quite certain about, because when TI develops a framework, it's like, I always say, it's more like built in stone and bolted to the ground. Like, it's really hard to uproot TI logic once it's there, because they had a reason in the first place to believe that it was true. It passed some sort of check, and therefore it must hold some sort of meaning, and therefore it's much harder to get rid of. And that can cause biases in the introverted judging dominant types. But biases are common across all of the types in different ways. William says, I appreciate your streams. Thanks for doing this. I'm gonna head out. Thanks for stopping in, William. I really appreciate it. Which personality type is apt to take self-quarantine super seriously? ISTJs, I would guess. Like the STJs in general, SFJs, are just generally the types that are going to be more so willing to conform to the social norms if they have to. But then again, it can also be just as stressful for them because the social norms have been destroyed, and therefore the life that they were living is no longer there, so they strive to have it back, so they break the norms that should be in place during the quarantine. So it's fluid. How do you spot an unhealthy INTP? Unhealthy INTPs are definitely the kind of people who just argue for the sake of arguing. They care about pointing out logical fallacies at the expense of the relationship that they have with the other person that they're talking with. Repressed extroverted feeling, essentially. Shigofumi says, I don't believe in IQ. Well, as a student of psychology and psychometrics and quantitative approaches, IQ is the single most researched thing quantitatively in terms of psychology. The research behind it is very extensive, but at the same time, I understand why you might not believe in IQ. So I'm not going to say, IQ is an attempt to measure what intelligence is, but that measurement's not going to always be perfect. Although I think IQ does a very good job. Like as we talked about in the beginning of the stream, Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence is useful because it talks about the idea of skill and aptitude in fields, whereas IQ doesn't that. IQ is measuring general overall competency and intelligence. Have a good one, Shigofumi. You say you're going to head out. That's fine. We're going to stream for about 10 more minutes. So if anybody's got any last questions they really want to ask before this stream ends, just let me know. I'm really thirsty. It's hard to believe it's already been 2 hours. Goodness. I'm glad I ate that Hot Pocket right before we started because I'm already getting hungry again. How does an INTJ defend his beliefs or things he considers to be correct? So I don't think that INTJs tend to often hold beliefs too heavily. The NI types in general are not going to be the types who have like these deep-rooted beliefs that are very true to them. but they're going to hold very true to their perceptions, the things that they've perceived to be true. Sorry, I was cracking that water bottle, and I just realized it's probably coming along in the mic. Sorry about that. But once an INTJ or an introverted intuitive type, or an ISTJ, even SI types, perceive something that's valuable to them or that they believe to be a possibility or truth, then it's going to be something that they hold very deeply within them. Like the INTJ who has a vision for their life and for their future. That becomes the number one thing that they do in their life, that they focus their life around. For me, it's going to graduate school and getting my master's and then my PhD. My entire life, including family, including friendships, is built around this goal. Strength Rationals has finally made it to a live stream. Well, we're only running for about 10 more minutes. So, Strength, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask, now's the time. I'm going to try and answer as many as I can. Is there a fictional character from your type that you relate to? I mean, well, there's fictional characters that I believe are great representations of types. I wouldn't say if I'm exactly a great representation of them or we connect on that level. Virgil from Devil May Cry, I think, is a great example of an INTJ. There's a character from Blaze Blue, my favorite fighting game series, named Aurelius Clover, who he's a villain, but I think he's a perfect representation of an INTJ. He's one of the best fictional representations of INTJs that I can think of. I always struggle to think of like characters and stuff off the top of my head. I don't have that any. Truth or reason, which one should be prioritized over the other? I don't know. That's hard because I feel like certain cases one needs to be over the other. You know, they always say the idea that Lady Justice is blind, but for me that's wrong. Like, and maybe that's just because I'm like an FI type. I don't think justice is or should be blind. I think context matters, which is something that would be abhorrent to most STJs. I think that's something that, you know, they want there to be these strict guidelines and rules, and if you break them, then they are worthy of punishment. But I believe that context really does matter in the grander scheme of things, and that's something that law systems tend to fail to recognize. Unhealthy INTJ, how would you identify them? Well, they're likely going to be highly secluded, unemotional, and the biggest thing about unhealthy INTJs is they're unmotivated. If an INTJ doesn't have something that they're motivated towards working towards, that's when they fall into their depths of kind of really being unhealthy. Which type would you care about relating to fictional characters the most? I think INFPs often have or FI dominant types in general tend to relate to fictional characters quite well. Because, you know, they can really internalize things that are part of their identity. Yen from the Witcher series is a great INTJ. Yeah, I think in the Witcher show, I typed her as an INTJ in a video I did a couple months back. Thought it was for fun. Sorry, my nose itches. So we got about 8 more minutes, so feel free to ask any questions. I do want to, again, thank patrons. I'm going to do the sweep of things I need to say again. Thank you for my patrons on Patreon. If you would like to support me so I can help, or so I can create more content like this, then please even consider just doing $1 a month on Patreon. Every little bit on Patreon helps. I really do mean it. You would be included on the credits of every video, and then if you're in the second or higher tier, you'd be in the credits of the live stream. And the only reason I had to cut out the first tier from live streams is because I have quite a few people, and the space is starting to thin. Also, remember that you can get personality typing sessions with me at astrosite.com, and also my Discord server is open to the public. It's a very open place where you can communicate and talk about typology from any system, even if you're someone who wants to talk about objective personality or you're a C.S. Joseph fan, that's fine. You're welcome in our server as long as you are respectful about talking about typology between systems. But also feel affinity 10 eyes and the impossible goals. Is that possible? I mean, if, you know, like for example, ISFPs tend to be exceptionally driven people as well because they have the FINI attribute to them. The Gamma Quadrant in general, SFPs and TJs, I think, are the most goal-driven of all types because they have super subjective goals that are really valuable to them. NI and FI together are a very interesting pair when it comes to long-term goals and inner desires. what types by functions are more compatible with INTJ? I think, in my personal opinion, and this is just personal preference, I get along with NFPs very well. And I talked about this earlier in the stream. Extroverted intuition, when it's casual and not always in this critical introverted thinking way like the ENTPs tend to have, or the INTPs, is very enjoyable to me when I can talk about things that are interesting and it doesn't have to be an argument over whether or not it's right or wrong. Like just fluid intuition. It's really nice. I enjoy that. And then INFJs I tend to get along with fairly well too. I don't often communicate with other INTJs much because there tends to be this dryness between two INTJs communicating because they're so personal and like unwilling to share themselves unless somebody else does it first. Sitting up. I realized this little light's back here. I probably should have covered it earlier, so I apologize if that's been there the whole time. Back to the roots code. Oh, that's not a question. Okay. I need to just double check and make sure I didn't miss a question on the thing. Okay, now I got all those. As far as I know. Does that strike as any particular type to you? I feel like. I mean, again, that if you're an FI dominant, you could be ISFP, developing tertiary introverted intuition, finding this inner goal that's important to you, but it's something that you're just now coming to realization about. Could be. There's a few different explanations about that. All right, so I got about 5 more minutes. I want to thank everybody for coming in to the live stream. I'm just going to chill here for a few minutes and ask anything or answer anything I can during these last few minutes. It's no rush or pressure. If you're out of questions, that's fine too. We can just chill for 5 minutes. Does anybody have any personal questions about me? Things they want to know about me, my life, what I do, YouTube, career, all that good stuff. Doesn't have to be something crazy. How would perceiving oneself as unintelligent, whether true or not, affect feelers versus thinkers? Well, I think especially like FE DOMs have this tendency to like, when they're in times of stress, go into like this mode of, oh, I'm such a dummy. I've seen that a lot with FE dominant types that I know. And I think it's because they're self-conscious about intelligence. Because TI overall as a function is a function that values being intelligent. So to have it as this huge part of the psyche, but still in this repressed state where it like pulls down on you, I think that's troublesome for the feeling dominant types. Even though FE dominant types can be just as intelligent, it's just something that they have this different kind of approach and value for. What Delta asked, how old are you? I'm 24, turning 25 later this year. And I need a haircut real bad. Yeah, what color? Yeah, great question. What is my family background? So my mother was white. She was born and raised in Canada. She passed away when I was young. So she was, I don't know if it's like Irish, Scottish. I always forget what it's just Canadian white is what I say. And my father is pureblood Puerto Rican because his grandparents moved, or his parents moved here to the U.S. and he was raised like in New York City as a Puerto Rican. So I am mixed. Yes, I do need to. You don't gotta tell me it's getting crazy. But I live on the East Coast in one of the states that just had a soft opening. So haircut places are open now. I'm just trying to give everything a few days before I go out and explore. Take any huge risks. Are there currently any anime or manga you're interested in? Well, I always love One Punch Man. One Punch Man is one of my favorite animes just because, or mangas because of the satire, and I read the webcomic that comes out ahead of the manga. I'm trying to think if there's any anime that I've been watching personally recently. I don't think so. My problem with anime is I have a really, like, my attention span is difficult for me because I can multitask really easily because like I always have 2 monitors. So usually if I'm watching something, it's while I'm playing a game or while I'm doing something else. I have a hard time just like sitting and doing one thing, especially when it comes to things like TV shows. I recently rewatched Soul Eater because I love Soul Eater. Was I ever confused about my type? Not in any meaningful way. I always scored as an INTJ. I've never scored as any type other than INTJ as far as I can remember. I've always resonated perfectly with INTJ in terms of the Briggs description of INTJ. Not talking about the online ones, I'm talking about the Jungian / Briggs descriptions of the introverted intuitive and the INTJ. Yeah, so it's never really been too much of an issue. I considered maybe INFJ for a while because a lot of people tend to think that I'm slightly higher in agreeableness than the average INTJ, but I don't really think I'm an INFJ at all. I don't see FE or TI in myself in the slightest. I see myself as a TEFI. All right, I think that's going to go ahead and wrap up the stream, everybody. So I appreciate you all stopping out, or stopping in to the stream, saying hi and doing this. I will try and do another one of these quite soon compared to how long ago the last one was, about 2 months ago. Thanks again to my patrons, and thanks again to everyone who just stopped in. Feel free to come in and say hi on the Discord server. Right after this, I'm just gonna go hop on over there to text chat for a little bit and say hi to the people who joined. So thank you everybody for stopping into the stream.